Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jessica Bennett. I write about gender and culture for the New York Times. I'm also an editor. And I am thrilled to be joined today by Sallie Krawcheck, CEO and co-founder of Ellevest, which is focused on closing the gender investment gap for women. Sallie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Jess, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So you all got a notification that this is being recorded. It is being recorded and it's an audio only event. So don't worry if you're not seeing us. You'll never know what we're doing behind the scenes here. And just before we begin, just want to remind everyone, we have a whole slate of programming that we have been producing and is really incredible every day at 4 p.m. You can also submit questions at any time during this event using the Q&A feature on Zoom. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom, there's a little feature that says Q&A. But Sallie, let's just get right into it. You know, coronavirus has exacerbated in a lot of ways many of the inequalities that have long existed under the surface. And we're seeing that in so many different realms. Can you give us a lay of the land in terms of what we are seeing when it comes to women's finances and just how worried are you?
Oh, Jess, I am worried sick right now. I'd start off with women's finances are in worse shape relative to men's than we commonly acknowledge. And what I mean by that is we talk all the time about the gender pay gap, and it's 82 cents to a man's dollar, and it's decades away from closing for white women, and 100 plus years for Black women, and 200 plus years for Hispanic women. And, you know, at least it's moving in the right direction, but so frustrating. That's not even beginning to scrape the surface of the issue, because there's a gender wealth gap. So that's how much we earn, working, the same amount of time. The gender wealth gap is how much we have. The gender wealth gap is 32 cents to a man's dollar, moving in the wrong direction, and is driven by the fact that we tend to work fewer years because as a country, we don't have a mandated paid parental leave. So women leave the workforce. We tend to have fewer perks at work. We tend to have more debt at higher interest rates. We tend to invest less, a whole bunch of reasons. But how much you earn matters. But even with it moving in the right direction, how much we keep and have is much less. So it means we went into this. And by the way, if you Google it, gender pay gap has something like 4.5 times the number of searches than gender wealth gap.
Yeah, that's actually a new term for me, and I cover these issues.
Yeah, and look, and it's not, they don't study it very often. It's every few years there's a Fed survey, it comes out, blah, blah, blah. But we went into this with a much smaller financial cushion. And if history is any guide, we're going to come out worse in a range of ways, whether it's we are today, the research tells us disproportionately losing our job, women are disproportionately losing their jobs. Et cetera, et cetera. Women will eat through that cushion faster.
So just how large is that wealth gap? How much of a cushion are we lacking?
It depending on where we are, right? It's on a relative basis, but it is, it's across the demographic. It is much worse for women of color than it is for white women. And as I mentioned, going in the wrong direction. So it can be, depending on where you are on that wealth spectrum, thousands of dollars less, hundreds of thousands. One way we look at it at Ellevest, we were founded, as mentioned, to tackle the gender investing gap. We were really the first who said, from my years on Wall Street, everybody blames women. Women don't invest as much as men do. By our calculation, it cost some women hundreds of thousands, for some women $1 million plus over the course of our lives. And we frankly tended to blame women for it because they're so risk averse, right? And we were really the first, as you know, to say, wait a second, maybe an industry in which, 90% of traders are men and 98% of mutual fund dollars are managed by men, maybe, we're just simply have built an industry that isn't built for women, that's built around trading, around winning, not built for the way women want to invest. So we see really at every step of the way, that this is just biased against us, not because it's meant to, but just because it was built that way.
Well, it's interesting in speaking about bias. I want to talk for a minute about government aid.
Mm-hmm.
So, many people, many small businesses are applying for these PPP loans.
Mm-hmm.
There are new reports out. There's a new report out today in the Times about how big corporations were able to get these kind of concierge services
Mm-hmm.
to help them get loans. And of course, we are now learning every day that many of them didn't need those loans.
Mm-hmm.
There was another report out from the Center for Responsible Lending that estimated that 90% of minority-owned businesses were or will be shut out of this small business loan program that was intended for small businesses. So, now what? What's happening there? And do you have hope?
Yeah. I'll tell you where. So I think many thoughts here, right? Why is this happening? Well, women-owned businesses already get much less in the way of small business loans than men-run businesses. Mm-hmm. And get less in venture capital dollars than men-run businesses. I mean, you may have heard the stats that despite the fact that venture startup companies run by women have 60% better returns than male-only run businesses, women-run business get something like 2 to 3% of venture capital dollars. So when you look across the spectrum, whether it's mom and mom or venture funded money, women tend to have been shut out. And what I think is going on here is if you're already shut out and you hear about this loan program, where the heck do you go?
Right.
Well, who do I go to? I don't know anybody. I don't have a banker. Oh, well, let me go over to XYZ large bank that I've heard of and try to call the 1-800 number and see if I can get a loan. And, what you're hearing is those banks were not set up for this. It moved very quickly, et cetera. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm finding it harder to be upset that bigger companies got the loans. I'm just finding it harder to be upset. I know I'm supposed to be upset that Shake Shack got a, I don't know what it was, $10 million plus loan. I know I'm supposed to be upset, except Jessica, they laid off, they furloughed a whole bunch of their workers. Right. And the whole concept behind this program was use the money to keep workers on. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, I guess I'm supposed to be upset that all these servers, were going to get their jobs back at Shake Shack because of the PPP loan versus the mom and mom. I'm sort of having trouble being upset about it. I think what Danny Meyer and his team did was what a prudent business person would do, which is, hey, here's money that will enable us to restore the jobs. Let us go get it. And you can say, well, they have access to other forms of capital. Not really. You try to go out and do, a secondary offering in the markets right now, equity. You're not going to do one. So I know I'm supposed to be upset about the big guys. I'm just not, because they would have put a bunch of little folks back to work. What is upsetting, though, is that if this runs out, you have people who are already outside of the system continuing to be outside of the system. Mm-hmm. The little bit of good news is for all that Washington, D.C., they don't get along, they hate each other, they argue about everything. You know what? They've come together on this stuff in a really impressive way, because what we don't remember about the 07-08 crisis, but I do because I was at Citi at the time.
You were there, yes.
Oh my gosh, is how slow they were. And that's in part why that crisis got so bad. And the policymakers here, let's just give credit where credit is due, actually have moved quickly and in size in a way that would have forestalled a lot of damage in 07-08.
I want to just remind people who may have joined us a little bit late. I am Jessica Bennett. I'm a writer and editor at the Times focused on gender issues. And we are speaking with Sallie Krawcheck, CEO and co-founder of Ellevest, which works to close the gender investment gap. And we are taking audience questions. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see a little Q&A button. Please ask your questions there. We will be reading them throughout this time. So Sallie, you mentioned, you were at Citibank, you were chief financial officer until September of 2008, which means you had an inside view of the events leading up to the crash that triggered the Great Recession. What can we learn from past downturns about what we're experiencing now, and in particular about women's finances and women's potential recovery?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say I was at Citi till September of 2008. Thank goodness I was not CFO through that whole period of time. I was actually running Smith Barney and the Citi Private Bank, during that 07, 08 time frame. Look, what I think we can learn, there are a couple of things that are important to keep in mind. The first of which is just remember, we have recovered from every recession and every depression in history. We have. Some have taken longer than others, but we have a remarkably resilient economy. It's not a perfect economy. It's not a fair economy, but it is an economy that knows how to grow. The second thing, for those who were investors on the call, as scary as this downturn has been, the destruction of value in the markets that we've seen, the weird things going on in the markets that we've seen, such as oil pricing, futures pricing going negative. It's also worth remembering that we have recovered from every stock market bear market in history. We've recovered from some more quickly than others, but we've recovered for all of them. And so there's a natural, oh my gosh, this time is different, and every time is different. But we, in my opinion, this is not going to be the only, economy that doesn't recover. This is not, in my opinion, going to be the only stock market that doesn't recover. So that's the good news. The other good news for women is we have found, for those women who are able to invest, who've invested in the stock market or a diversified investment portfolio, who've had the privilege to be able to do that, we actually find they outperform men during these environments. Why? Because they actually trade less, panic less, freak out less. And so we see for some group of women, the ability to just ride this through, probably because we're so busy taking care of the kids at home here in quarantine, making the dinners, all that stuff. But there is that glimmer of good news. The bad news is I was really hoping, that we would see maybe the forward strides we'd made continuing to propel us through this downturn. But I was really saddened to see a piece of research a couple days ago that came out that said that male academics are submitting 50% more research papers and women less. And that's telling me that what's happening in these homes around the country is a little bit what's happening in my home, which is, I tell you, Jessica, I mean, we've moved back to traditional gender roles.
Have you? That was my next question.
Yes. And I cook, he doesn't, which typically doesn't matter. We live in New York. So it's like, do you want pizza or sushi?
Right.
Who's going to dial? But when you're back in the home, all of a sudden, if we want to eat food that is edible, I'm cooking. And so, you're hearing it again and again. There's just a sort of reflexive move backwards. That's before we get to the tragedy of women who were not safe in their homes. And we also should, so we're also seeing, sort of part and parcel of this, that a higher percent of women have considered quitting their jobs during this period of time because of these care responsibilities. And I mentioned earlier, women are losing their jobs at a disproportionately higher rate. So the really frustrating thing about this is that in most downturns, we've seen diversity and women lose ground. And unfortunately, I think we're seeing the same damn thing again.
So you think that more women are going to drop out because of these childcare duties? It's interesting because this is typically unseen, unpaid labor. And we know that women are, I think, 3 times as likely to take on the majority of the domestic work. But now we are seeing it in many ways. You're not literally seeing it with us right now because we are not on video, but a lot of people are seeing it. So is there a positive spin to this? Is there a way to get partners to step up? What do we do?
Yeah, I would love to have a positive spin to it, but I think we need to look at the facts and recognize them for what they are, which is that we've gone backwards in each downturn. We're going backwards in this one, and sort of ask ourselves, ladies, what are we going to do that's different on the other side? I'm sort of over and here's a new piece of research that says diversity drives better performance. And here's another piece of research, and boy, the smart companies are just going to get it, right? And they're going to drive it, and they're going to put in flexibility for people, and they're going to have more diverse leadership teams. I figure if we keep waiting for that, we're going to be where it's demonstrating we're going to wait for forever. And so I think the real point of sliver of sunlight will be when we come out of this, do we decide enough is enough and recognize the embedded bias that still exists, in our society? Do we, recognize that men, so many men have had their turn running countries, running positions of power, and that we are going to begin to say vote as a block. We are going to, pull our business from companies that don't represent us. We are going to not invest in companies that don't represent us. I mean, are we going to, march? Yes, march. But after we march, have a real plan that we coalesce for how we shift and change this. Because look, I think we're at the stage now where we can say that embedded misogyny is literally killing us. Literally, right?
You mentioned, do we decide enough is enough? So, okay, hopefully we do. But then what do we do? What is the first step that people can take?
Yeah. Again, do we get together and vote as a block and vote some of these people out of office that, simply are not, advancing our interest? One key example, if I could change one thing, Jessica, and I'm not a public policy expert, but if I could change one single thing, it would be mandated paid maternity leave. Parental leave, yes, but if all I can get is maternity leave, okay. That we are the richest country in the history of the world, and we are so mean that we do not provide mothers with time off when their babies are born is just outrageous. By the way, what's further outrageous is you've probably seen the research that says that paid maternity leave pays for itself in less than a year. You mentioned I was CFO of Citi. That's not an expense, that's an investment. And that's the kind of investment you want to do all friggin' day long. Well, hold on, how does that even make sense, Sallie? You're probably saying, you have to pay people to go on parental leave. So it's an expense. Yes, but if you do that, they're more likely to come back. And if you don't, then the baby gets sick or they don't have the childcare, set up or whatever. When people come back, you don't have to replace them and pay for that. And you don't have to train their replacement and pay for that. So it's in a way a hidden expense if you don't provide it, but it's a very expensive thing to do. And on top of that, this is where the gender pay gap really starts. That it's at the time a woman has a child that she takes a hit to her pay, whereas men actually get the daddy bonus, as I'm sure you're aware. And so it's, it's a country that has overwhelmingly been run by privileged individuals, privileged males, that just have not seen this as a priority. And at some point, for us as women, do we have that moment, much as the gay community had a moment around coalescing around gay marriage? Do we say this is the thing? And I'm hopeful that it is.
I'm going to go to a couple of audience questions. They are sort of pairing nicely with what we've been talking about. So Kim asks, in terms of women investing, Is there evidence that women also take on things like taking care of extended family members? I think the answer is yes. Charitable giving, loans to friends and family in need, community service, that type of work, instead of putting those resources toward investing?
Yeah. In many ways, what we hear from women all the time is, well, I'd love to invest, but, and the but is I'm busy and I've got to call my mom and I've got to do the carpool. And oh, by the way, I work. And so I've got to be twice as good as the guys that work in order to get half as far. So I'm really busy with that too, and blah, blah, blah. And so there's that has been a barrier to us. The other barrier, which when I say it, you're going to be like, wait, that makes no sense. And then you're not going to be able to unsee it, is that we have received a lifetime of messages that, investing is for men. Money is for men, right? Being good with money is for men. That from childhood in houses in quarantine today, parents talk to little boys about making money, being wealthy, go for it, be the CEO, and talk to girls about budgeting and planning and being careful and et cetera. When little boys grow up, their money media is CNBC and Bloomberg and Barron's and Cranes and all that stuff. And it's all about growing and investing and buying low and selling high. And for women, there's no money media. And when we do read about money in our women's websites or women's magazines, it's in terms of financial planning doesn't have to be very, very hard. And, take this money quiz, or you a Gary or Miranda. So it's very patronizing. And on top of that, it's guilt inducing. So I know y'all have had a little run at the New York Times, as we did at Ellevest, on the whole, don't buy the latte, invest the money instead. And, you're like, what? And it's coded, right? Don't get the facial, don't buy the shoes, invest money instead. And you're like, what? So I can't have the latte? What is that even going to be enough to matter? And the answer is no. But it's this, there's nobody saying, don't buy the tool chest, don't buy the T-bone. So for women, it's all patronizing and guilt inducing. And so as a result of it, for men, money is about abundance. And when you talk to men about money, it's power and control and independence. And for women, it's scarcity and loneliness and uncertainty. And so she's learned money, she's not good at money. It's hard. It's latte, And so when she thinks about investing, it's immediately like, I've heard I'm risk averse. By the way, that's not true. It's just not true.
I was going to ask you that. Okay, so that is a myth.
True. It's not true. What we have found at Ellevest is the gender difference is not risk aversion, it's risk awareness. And the gender difference is men will take risks they don't understand, and women want to understand it. God, those demanding women, I tell you. Investing only seriously, literally at an Ellevest and others too, in order to invest, it takes 10 or 15 minutes. We put together a diversified investment portfolio for you. We're a fiduciary. We're obligated to put your interest ahead of our own. This whole thing takes 10 or 15 minutes. It is literally the highest return thing you could do with 15 minutes in your whole life, literally, historically. But yet we think it's so hard, I'm not good at it, et cetera. So that's what the barrier is. The barrier is actually society, and I think, Jessica, from where you sit, if you could do one thing, it's how do we get it, today, even millennial women, Gen Z women, it's still an attractive female characteristic for them to be bad with money, right? Even today, how do we change that? And the final thing, I'll finish the rant.
I like the rant.
I'm on a roll. The final thing, I'll say is if men had gotten together 100 years ago, which I don't think they did, okay? But if they'd gotten together 100, 200 years ago and said, hey, how do we keep women from having full power? This is what they would have done. They would have convinced us we're bad with money and that being bad with money is an attractive female characteristic. It would have kept us off of Wall Street. It would have kept us out of venture funding. Therefore, if we're not on Wall Street and in the investing jobs, then we're probably not building a product like in Ellevest. For women, we're probably building one around trading and, screaming and making more money and watching CNBC, right? And over in venture, if there are no women there, which there aren't, just about 5% of the decision makers are women, then we're probably not funding women-run businesses. And if you do all that, then the power stays with men. And so that, I don't think they said, hey, let's keep the money for ourselves so we keep the power. But this would have been a pretty damn good plot if they had chosen to do so.
So some of this is about overturning those stereotypes. There's a good question from Andrea, who has 2 daughters, and asks what age is appropriate to talk to them about investing, and what is sort of the beginner essential advice that she can share with them as teens who want to grow into financially literate adults.
Yeah. So I never fret as much about what you say as opposed to what you show them. And so for me, it's not, hey, you should have them reading the Wall Street Journal at XYZ age, just not the opinion page, but the rest of it. It's not so much what it says, it's what do they see you doing? Because some of these gender norms are enforced by the fact that they see daddy, looking at the brokerage statement, but they see mom who's doing the, grocery list and, hey, let me figure out the budget. So with my kids, I always wanted to say, hey, I'm checking the brokerage statement. I'm investing more money. Hey, I'm checking my 401k. Hey, the market's down. I want to figure out what happened today. And talking to my husband. And I also in front of my kids, hey, I'm about to go ask for a raise. I'm thinking about doing this way. So that the image, and then the information comes out later, right? Oh, what is the stock market, mommy? You can answer that. But I think it's seeing you, who, even when they're teenagers and they're telling you they don't love you, they still love you, and they're modeling their future selves off of you. So seeing you in control of money, is I think what the really important issue is here.
Can you talk a little bit about what the breakdown in your family looks like or looked like when your children were younger?
In terms of money or in terms of?
Yeah, in terms of modeling, I guess.
Yeah. Well, look, what I would say, I never, and I'm a little bit older. I try to pretend like I'm 28, but I'm not. I sort of had a few things with my family. First of all, with my generation of women, there was always this guilt about working. And sometimes they would share that, they felt so bad about it that their children would pick up on it. And I used to cry when I'd go on business trips, but I would never let them see me cry. And so I was always, I love my job, and, close the door and then burst into tears. And I love being with you, but I love being away. And then Jessica, as you've been too kind to mention, I, was publicly fired a couple of times. One during the, I know, flashbacks.
I love the openness. We should talk about these things.
It was on the front page of the New York Times business section, so it's a little bit hard to pretend like it didn't happen. But back in 07, 08, I was the only senior executive who partially reimbursed clients for losses in the downturn, not because you get reimbursed when you have losses, but because there were products we had missold. And I'll never forget, it was actually on my birthday. There was a big New York Times article about it. It's just, it's about as horrifying as, an event as you can imagine. But, with my kids, I talked about, when I knew I was going into a board showdown with the CEO over whether to reimburse clients, and I knew that my best case was we would partially reimburse clients and I would lose my job, and my worst case is we wouldn't and I would still lose my job. I told my kids the night before, I'm going in, this is happening tomorrow, this is the biggest day of my life, here's what's going to happen, and somebody have a vodka tonic on the other side of the door when I come home tonight. And so I think allowing them to see those ups and downs, sort of normalizes it, as opposed to the guilt and the I wish I was here and all that stuff. And then the same with the money. I mean, they could see me, my main job was a money job, but, I didn't tell the kids, hey, we just paid this much for this, because, my son would have blabbed it all over school, but we were relatively open.
Colleen asks, with so many people being laid off, furloughed, or taking pay cuts, how do we recover in terms of salary or salary negotiations in, 6 months from now or a year from now or further out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is affecting so many people. And I've talked to a number of young people who've lost their jobs. And and said, look, there's nothing good about this, right? There's nothing good about this. If I were try to find the tiny, tiny, tiny ray of light, there's no shame right now in getting laid off. None, because it's happening so broadly. And maybe you are one of the people who didn't adore everything about your job. And so maybe this gives you an opportunity to sit back and take the time to say, what do I really love and want to do? So Jessica, I don't know if you know this, I took a maternity break, which I would never recommend. I quit my job as an investment banker when I was pregnant with my son. I would never recommend anybody do it. It was sort of a moment of, like, I can't do this, and quit. And I went home.
So with no leave, you quit with no leave.
Quit with no leave, which I would never recommend, but I was sick and I didn't feel good and I hated my job and what am I doing and blah, 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 right? But it was at that leave, I was out of work for about 10 months. And it was really only through stepping back and taking that time that I was able to say, what did I hate about that job? What did I like about it? What did I love about it? What was missing? Do I want to work on a team? Do I want to be an individual contributor? Oh, I love the numbers, but I missed the writing. I love the but, da, 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 da. And then I'd love to say, I was standing in my kitchen one day, 29 years and 11 months old, eating a pear. And all of a sudden it hit me, I love to say, as it does so many young women at that time, that I wanted to be a sell-side equity research analyst. I know, it doesn't sound exciting to you, but I promise you, when I had the thought, I'm like, son of a, that's it. By the way, I went to Bernstein. I was the #1 ranked analyst, in the fastest, sort of one of the fastest in the industry. But what the point is I never would have gotten there if I hadn't taken the time to step back. So that is for those who have been laid off. There may be, I don't want to presume, and I sit here and talk about this from a position of privilege, having a job right now, but there may be an opportunity to rethink and have a breakthrough. For those who still have jobs and are working through, I have a saying I love to say to my folks, your time to shine, your time to shine. There are a lot of folks who are not, who are very distracted, mourning, a little bit lost. And if that's you, my heart goes out to you. If you are able to compartmentalize those feelings of grief and, take the time, maybe first thing in the morning to, have a moment, have an hour, and you're able to really, try to shine as much as you can in your job. This is a time when your value can become really clear to your boss, right? Who is going to say that, boy, she really came through. When we didn't have all the resources we typically have, when we were operating in a period of uncertainty. And then when you get through to the other side, you'll be in a position of saying, hey, I helped the business continue to grow. How about that raise, right? What's implicit on this is don't ask for a raise right now. Just stand back, right? Just stand back. And it's your time to demonstrate what you're capable of. And then the negotiations, with the numbers under your belt of, we had a 10% increase or only a 10% decrease when other people were having a 15% decrease. That's when you go back and remind the boss of your value and get that raise.
Mm-hmm. Could you speak a bit to the issue of women in poverty and whether more women will be pushed into poverty after this fallout?
I'm afraid the answer is yes. That we, as mentioned earlier, women went into the downturn in poverty at a greater rate. For those who had net assets, or what one would call wealth, wealth that is a third of that of men, are being more distracted at home, often by the childcare, by the traditionally female work. And so, coming through this the other side, I just can't see a way that we don't have a greater percent of women in poverty, and a greater percent of women, who've moved backwards. And I don't know of a way to spin that and now the positive, Jessica, is XYZ.
Right.
The only positive from this is when are we as women going to say to each other, enough is enough? Yep. Enough is enough,
There are a few readers who are asking about the impact of women on women without children. how are they being impacted and how can they be rewarded? Is there any research that shows whether or not the chips are stacked against single women compared to women with family? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it depends on, what the lens is, but I can tell you that there is some research that shows that women who are not caregivers tend to, have a, pay that is much closer to a typical man's than women who are caregivers. And I'm sure you've seen Anne-Marie Slaughter's work where she would put forth that the difference is no longer male, female. It's, breadwinner, caregiver. And that she would argue that we as a society do not necessarily undervalue women per se. We undervalue caregiving per se. And I think we see that, Jessica, really across, whether it's the woman at work who has to leave for the parent-teacher conference and, they're not committed and they, let's give them a mommy tax. Or, what I'm really thinking about, and I'm sure you are as well, is women are making up a bigger share of essential workers.
Right.
And there's research, Jessica, that tells us that we as human beings are not willing to pay very much for necessities, but we are willing to pay a lot for luxuries. And I think we can almost take a gender lens to that, which is, hey, we're not willing to pay nurses that much or school teachers, right? But, we sure are willing to, and we're not willing to pay for water very much that's brought to our homes as much as we need, but we're willing to pay for the hot new bag, new pocketbook. In a way, you're almost like, we women are the essential workers, but yet we're willing to pay other jobs more, people in other types of roles. And so I do think, as a society, we just need to sort of step back and what do we value? Because I don't think there's a parent out there who doesn't value teachers more today than they did 6 months ago. I don't think there's anybody who has been impacted by this who doesn't value nurses and doctors more than we do today. And, as a society, we have just devalued these, what we now are recognizing are essential workers. I remember when, back when I was working at the big firms on Wall Street, you sort of, in a way you get what you pay for. I mean, in Singapore, their regulators, they would pay them, what bankers were paid. And those, you got these just on it regulators, and if in the United States, that was more of a, they weren't, those jobs weren't in as much demand, then okay, then you get what you pay for.
Right. So I'm going to read a few different questions that all go to the same point, which is how are gender roles going to be affected at this moment? And so Heather asks, given the forced shift in the way we're working now with more flexible hours, could we actually be in a better position than pre-pandemic to create a more gender equitable workforce? But before you answer that, I want to just give you a little flavor of what others are asking. Dania says, now that we've come back to traditional gender roles, so rather than, is this actually better for an equitable workforce now that we're in it? How will we break out of them again, particularly when more women are on the forefront?
Yeah. Look, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you my answer. I'm spending my entire life trying to get more money to women. At the core of it, we're talking about a power imbalance. And when I look at this, what I see is a money imbalance. And look, this is sort of driven by my perspective of having spent my career on Wall Street. But, every single one of us knows that when a woman has less money than a man, she has less freedom. She has less power. I tend to think of the Me Too and Time's Up moment and movement as being, it's a power imbalance. It's a money imbalance. It's a money imbalance. You had these very powerful, very wealthy men who were preying on less powerful women who didn't have the monetary ability to say, get the hell away from me, right? I mean, I sort of think, to use a very practical example, I can't think of a woman or man I know who would have stayed in the room with Charlie Rose when he was walking around with his robe half open. And so to me, it sort of comes down to a money imbalance, and we see it everywhere, right? We see women we're stuck in the Me Too because of a money imbalance. We see women who are stuck at a job they don't love, they can't afford to quit it. That's a money imbalance. We see women stuck in marriages they can't leave. It's a money imbalance. In fact, there's research that says, I think in almost every case of domestic physical abuse, there's financial abuse as well. So women, and women know, that in these traditional patriarchal marriages, if a woman leaves and they're divorced, her standard of living, the money she has goes down by a double-digit percent, and I mean a healthy double-digit percent, and his goes up. And so this is about, in a socialist society, it might not be, but in a capitalist society, this is about a money imbalance. And part of, the reason I started Ellevest is when I was looking, I said, well, a lot of people are working, we started with the gender pay gap. It feels like every time you turn around, someone's trying to help women earn more money. Amazing. But again, as we mentioned earlier, that's been moving in the right direction, but yet the money we keep, has been moving in the wrong direction. And so when I looked at it, I said, what I think the real lean in is actually investing. Why? Because we can choose to do it. If you're trying to get a raise, like your boss has to say yes, right? Investing a percent out of every paycheck, that can help you move forward, and you don't need anybody's permission to do that. And it has been, investing has been an enormous wealth creator over time that women have simply been shut out of. And yep, I know we're in a equity market downturn now, but historically the equity markets have been upward trending with volatility around them. It's driven enormous growth in value, So I tend to look at this and say, if you see a power imbalance, I see a money imbalance. And if I can figure out a way to get more money in the hands of women, then women can say, you know what, I'm not cooking dinner every last night. We're ordering in, right? Or, I'm not sticking around in this marriage anymore. I'm not doing this job where, I continue to be undervalued. I have the ability and the wherewithal to leave it and find another job or start my own thing or something. Money, I know it's tacky to talk about. I know as women, we've been socialized. We're not allowed to talk about it. It's not attractive, but at the core of it, power. Yep.
I think that there's this idea, and I know I've had this idea myself, that you have to be wealthy to invest. Do you?
Historically, you did. And when we started Ellevest, I said, this is no, absolutely not. We don't have an investing minimum at Ellevest. You can literally invest, I guess, literally a penny, but I love to joke, I can't give you a diversified investment portfolio for less than $1. And the reason, Jessica, that we have no minimum is because the minimums the industry had historically were, quite frankly, sexist and racist, right? Because who has the money? Right. The guys, the white guys. And so they were the ones who were able to access investing. And so we said, you know what, no minimum. Of course we lose money, for those who don't have much invested with us, but it does open another avenue. Wealth begets wealth. Wealth has been generated in this country in two important ways. One was real estate, which compounds, right? And so the way a lot of American families made money was they got the mortgage, they invested, and the wealth compounded as real estate grew. The bigger way has been to invest in the stock market. Real estate has gone up on average annually about 3% a year, different in different parts of the country. Investing 9.7% a year since the 1920s. So investing has been the greater driver of relative wealth.
Are there any, we have to wrap up in a minute, but before we go, I wanted to ask, are there any resources you can suggest? Ellevest, of course, for women who want to learn more about becoming financially literate or who want to invest in woman-owned businesses?
Yeah. So, yes, of course, Ellevest. And I tell you what we've done during this pandemic, which is there's so many, there were so many questions about money before, triple, quadruple, that right now because of the job losses and the uncertainty and so on. And so what our team has committed to do is, in addition to, if you go over to the Ellevest website, you go to the magazine section, there are articles and articles and articles and articles. And you can follow us on Instagram and we answer questions there. But the big thing we've done is we've made a commitment to our community, which means, by the way, everybody, that if you email us a money question at questions@ellevest.com, we will answer every money question. And that's investing question, that's financial planning question, that's career questions. We've got career coaches on staff as well. We answer them all personally. We then anonymize them and post them on our website, in an article on our website, so you can see what other people are asking. So that's, obviously I think that's the right place to be. I just find there's so much bad advice out there, and so much waste of time advice. What do I mean? Buy this, buy this sector in the stock market, sell this in the stock market, and you're like, no, just relax, right? And just invest steadily in a diversified investment portfolio.
I think that's great advice. Okay, questions@ellevest.com. That's how people can send their questions in?
That's right.
Perfect. Sallie, you are incredible. Thank you so much for joining us on today's call. For those who are listening in, this is part of an ongoing series of conversations we're doing every day with New York Times journalists and incredible experts daily at 4 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow, you can hear from our well editor, Tara Parker Pope, who will be talking with teens about how they're dealing with isolation. You can see our full slate of digital events at timesevents.nytimes.com. We want to give a special thank you to our subscribers who make all of our work possible. Sallie, thank you so much.
Jessica, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Take care of yourself.
Take care, all.